So I just got a new idea for a bowl that I'm really interested in trying out. If you imagine this piece of oak here is the rim of a bowl, I'm thinking about putting a square piece of wood on top of this so that the corners stick out on four sides, and then those corners would be sort of sculpted down and into sort of like a flower petal shape. And then the middle would be hollowed out just like normal, and the whole bowl would sort of look like a blossom. And so I'm thinking about having one square piece of wood on top and then a couple of other pieces on the bottom that I can sculpt into sort of a longer, narrower sort of bowl that I've been doing. It seems like a really interesting idea, and I want to get started on it right away. So stick around. I think I want to use this piece of maple for the flower petals that I was talking about. And because it's pale, I can dye it or stain it if I need to make a more interesting visual effect. It was also free. I got it out of a dumpster. You know, I feel like I'm really going to be a success in woodworking when someday I look out my window and I see somebody stealing wood out of my dumpster. Now the next thing I need to do is get other pieces of wood that I can laminate underneath it to build up the round part of the bowl. I think the best thing that I could add to this piece of maple is this piece of cypress that I have. At least I assume it's cypress because that's what somebody wrote on it. I guess it's Australian cypress. I don't know. I've never worked with it before. And then I was thinking I would take this piece of walnut and cut it to size and laminate that on there, and then the whole thing would sort of give me the depth that I'm looking for. The only problem is that now that I'm looking at it, I don't know, I'm not really happy with the walnut with these other two. I did a little more digging and I found this piece of wood instead. This is cherry, and the color match just seems to be better. These three woods, they go together better than I think the walnut would. And this piece of cherry also gives me a lot more depth. The whole bowl is going to be, the whole thing will be like 9 inches deep. Now the biggest problem now is that none of these are exactly flat, and I can't glue them up the way they are. I think the biggest issue is this piece of maple. It's pretty flat, you can see, but it's not flat enough for a glue up, and it's not smooth enough. Of course, I'm Captain Handplane, and so I'd want to plane it, except that this wood, the grain is just a nightmare. It's really twisty, there's a lot of run out, there's knots in the top portion of the wood. There's no way I can plane this. So I've got to get a little bit creative. Okay, so I've got it on the faceplate and it spins freely. The theory here is that I'm going to take this square nose cutter that I have and go across the face of it like this while it's spinning. And if I do it really carefully, I'm going to end up with a flat and smooth surface. Machinists call this a facing cut, and just because it's a wood lathe and a homemade tool, why can't I be as good as a machinist? Well, lots of reasons, I know, but I need to try this anyway. Facing it off with the lathe worked really well, and the surface is actually totally flat now. So the next thing to do is to cut the cypress piece round and glue it on, and cut the cherry piece round and glue that on, so I've got the whole laminated stack. But I'm looking at it and I'm thinking that I don't know how much I like just leaving this piece square. I don't think I'm going to get that organic look that I'm looking for. So I think instead of just leaving it square, I should take the bandsaw and cut a nice shallow arc in each straight line, kind of like this, so that I've got a more curved shape and the ends will look a little bit more like flower petals and a little bit less like just the corners of a square. I used the bandsaw at work to cut this out into the beginnings of my flower blossom shape, and that part came out fine. There's still a little bit of gaps in between some of these pieces. I couldn't get them all perfectly flat, so where I would usually use wood glue for this, instead I'm going to use some epoxy and I'm going to thicken it with wood dust so that any of the gaps are going to get filled up. I'm starting to get a feel for what it must be like to be Peter Brown, because he does his videos where he just starts on a project and does the whole thing in front of the camera and he has no idea how it's going to turn out. And it's scary. I don't know if I like doing videos this way. Now it's the next morning, so the epoxy should be dry. Okay, here's my turning blank. Yeah, I'm gonna have to find some way to get this monstrosity on the lathe and get it spinning. That ought to be interesting. I think I have to turn this between centers in order to be able to actually get to the whole back and have it supported so that it doesn't just fly off the lathe. But my spur center, it's seen better days. It's pretty chewed up. So I'm sharpening it. And while I'm at it, I'm also trying to reshape it, trying to get the edges of the points to bite in first and get them to slope in towards the middle. And yeah, I gotta do something with the spur in the middle here too. It's gonna be a few more minutes. So there's no question that this is the scariest thing that I've ever turned. These big wings that are rock maple are gonna be coming around at a minimum of 600 RPMs, and that's if I keep the lathe at the lowest speed. I'm looking at the tool rest and where it is, and God, if my fingers or something get caught in between this and the tool rest, I mean, it'll break the finger, definitely. So, I haven't done a lot of dangerous turning so far. This is definitely one. I'm gonna need to be really careful about this. I'm gonna turn it on. Got my safety glasses on, and I'm gonna step back. Let's see how it spins. It spins fine, but I'm still scared. Alright, so we're getting there. These pieces are round. This Australian cypress turns really nicely. Big, long shavings, even though it's dry wood. It's real smooth. But I don't feel like I'm getting good camera angles here, so I need to figure out something better to do with the camera. Hang on a minute. That's better. Okay, now I've got it. The cypress is now undercut all around the maple, and I didn't even mean to, but I started cutting the maple, and it wasn't a disaster. Right in the middle there, I switched to my small Oland tool instead of my big bowl gouge, and it's got a sharper point, and it can get into these tight spaces better. So definitely score one for the tool makers. It's good to be able to make your own stuff rather than just counting on what you can buy. This isn't easy. So now the flower petal shapes are starting to come out. This is really new territory for me. These are interrupted cuts, and it's really weird to feel the wood just come around and thwack the tool little by little instead of having a nice smooth cut. So at this point I feel like I've got this shape pretty much where I want it to be. And I think one of the advantages of turning between centers is I should be able to just flip this thing over and start working from the other direction. This is a tough setup from a tool perspective. There's almost no place for the tool rest to go, and it's really hard to keep it out of the way of the turning, keep it out of the way of the tailstock. So the way I have it set up, it probably isn't the best way, but it's the only thing that's going to work. Got that nice curve to it. I've got to work it a little bit more over, get rid of some of these flats that I have. I don't know. I'm just working on these tiny little pieces here. They're like 1 inch square, but they're pretty much determining the shape of the whole thing. So it's really tough to get the tool to cut smoothly and leave a good finish when most of what you're turning is just thin air. I need to start hollowing, not in the middle here, because I'm going to have to do something different for that, but I've got to get the back end of the flower petals figured out so I can see where we're going. So I'm really happy. I'm finally starting to get a little dip in here. It's not straight across anymore. And that means that the curve I'm making is really starting to give it that organic shape that I'm looking for. It's still blocky and kind of ugly. It looks like the face hugger from Alien, but I'm going to keep working on it. It's going to get better. So I was turning and I switched my grip just for a second. And I had this hand over near the pedals, and it just came right around and clipped me. Took most of the skin off that knuckle. Surprisingly, it doesn't hurt that much. It's just bleeding a lot. Might be time for me to take a break for the day. I don't know. We'll see. At this point, the turning is pretty much done. I just need to scrape the inside, scrape the outside, sand it, and shape the tenon that the live center is attached to. Now at this point, I feel like I should explain something. Somewhere along the line, things changed. This was going to be a bowl, and this is just not a bowl anymore. It's just not. I think we've crossed some uncrossable divide where there's no going back, and now this is a sculpture. I know, it wasn't the plan, but this is not going to be a bowl, and it looks like some sort of weird flower, so I really think the thing I should do is just go with it. I'm going to push this as far as I can and see how much of like a weird flower sculpture I can make out of this, because why not? So now I'm going to start working on the outside. I'm done with the lathe, so it's going to be a lot of handwork and a lot of sanding and Dremel tool and stuff like that. We'll go from there. Now I'm in the home stretch. I'm shaping the crease in each petal to give it that really organic, plant-like look. Using a combination of files and rasps, and the best tool I've come up with is just a piece of wood with some sandpaper spray adhesive to it. That gives me a bunch of different surfaces that I can use and lets me really sculpt the wood. Now I'm trying to figure out what to do with the middle part, and the best thing I came up with is to cut off the tenon left over from the lathe and put in some sort of decoration. I found this little brass button and I gave it to my daughter, And then I said to her, "Oh, darling, Daddy really could use that for one of his woodworking projects. Would you mind if I had it?" And she said, "No, mine." And so this morning I bought it off of her for $1. I just drill a hole and set it in with some epoxy. After about 3 hours of sanding, and no, that's not an exaggeration, I'm finally up to the finishing stage. I'm using wipe-on polyurethane because it dries fast, and it's a good finish. And this is it. I don't even know what to think of it. It started out as a bowl, and then it was more of a flower, and now it's, I don't know, a sculpture, an art piece. I don't even know what it is. It's interesting. It's pretty, I guess. I don't know. I guess I'd like to know what my viewers think. So leave a comment. You know, be nice. I mean, this is the internet, so try to be nice. Thanks for watching.